February 26th, 2024. This is episode 55 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Mike Koomar. Tonight, Mike and I will go over some of the action from the weekend as we are getting very close to March, the NCAA tournament, and in just 1 week's time, Mike, the Atlantic Sun Conference tournament starts. So we're getting real close to the action. You know, whenever that first team that gets eliminated is when it really sets in for me. And that's 7 days away. But first, I'll go to your team of the week. Had a couple decent choices.
I had to reluctantly go with the Houston Cougars for this one. They started the week with a win over the number 6 team in the country at home, Iowa State. It was an 8-point win, but don't get it twisted. This game never really felt like Iowa State had a chance. Houston led the entire way, and it was just an overall really good win for Houston. They followed that up with a game against the Baylor Bears in Waco, the highest anticipated game in Waco for a home Baylor game since maybe about 4 years ago to the day when number 1 Baylor took on number 2 Kansas. And Houston got off to a really strong start. They kind of let it go at the end, but they ended up knocking off the Bears in overtime. Big game for a couple of big players there. Sharp had 18. Shed had 10 assists in this game. LJ Cryer also had 15 in his first game back against the Bears. So Houston able to get it done because of the quality of their starting lineup. I think there's still a little bit of concern about how strong their bench is, but with how good of a starting lineup they have, it's tough to think that these guys aren't the favorite for the national championship now.
Yeah, they're certainly in a good shape, and we'll go to bracketology at the end, Mike, but there are 3 number 1 seeds who are definite, and it really doesn't matter who gets 1, 2, or 3 because Houston will likely go to the South Regional, which is in Texas. UConn will most likely pick Boston, and Purdue will most likely pick Detroit. It doesn't really matter the order of those 3. That'll be where those 3 teams end up. So, you know, it might be nice to say you're the number 1 overall seed, but the only thing that really matters is picking the region, and it's not going to matter. And Houston's in great position to get a number 1 seed now, even if they do happen to take a loss. You know, they got Cincinnati at home, Oklahoma, UCF on the road before Kansas at home. You know, I don't see them lose. I don't see them losing any of those games, and we'll talk about the team that they end the regular season with later. But before we go to Baylor, Mike, have to be feeling pretty good about the Cougars at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think last week, Sean, I talked about how we thought that they'd have a few more road bumps than they have this year. But with how experienced and well-rounded this starting lineup is, it's pretty clear that they came to the Big 12 ready to play. And we're seeing this game in and game out. They've had a couple of tight games. I mean, this Baylor game got really tight. Baylor took a lead going into overtime. They had a tight game against Cincinnati. But they're finding ways to win these games. They're not losing their close games like a Baylor is right now. Baylor's losing all of their close games. Not so much for the Houston Cougars. And it's been incredibly impressive to see what they've done. Even when they fell off in the second half against Baylor, they could have easily folded in overtime.
Yeah, they're 24-3 on the year. All 3 losses are true road games against teams that will hear their name on Selection Sunday. So, you know, you don't play true road games in the tournament. So a lot to be happy about for Houston. Baylor, Mike, had a free throw with 3-4 seconds left. Chance to take the lead. Yves Missi does not make it. It's kind of the same story for Baylor. They've had a bunch of opportunities here to win some close games. They end up not getting the job done. I'll ask you this. Are you in the camp of just keep getting these and eventually one of them will go your way, or are you starting to get worried about their execution down the stretch?
I've got a foot in each one of those sections, Sean, and they're 19-8. Only 2 of those games, I think you can say, yeah, they got beat. Michigan State, they got beat. And then last week, I think against Brigham Young, they got beat. They lost by 7. You know, yeah, they kind of hung around at the end, but BYU beat them in that game. Other than that, I mean, we're looking at games that I think they should have won. Against Kansas, you have 2 chances to send that game to overtime with wide open 3-pointers. They missed them both. Texas, they give up a wide open layup as the buzzer sounds. Kansas State, they foul a 3-point shooter on a 4-point play to win the game there. I mean, I could keep going if you like, but I'm not going to do that.
It's the same, more the same.
It's more the same. Duke, the same story. But I think there's a lot of concern right now. Can the Bears execute coming down the stretch, especially in some of these games where they did end up winning, but they still didn't perform coming down the stretch. They got away with one against Cincinnati earlier this year. They've played a lot of games that, they've let teams back in. So time will tell for the Bears. I think they've got a big one tonight on the road in Fort Worth against their arch rival, the TCU Horned Frogs. We're going to learn what the Bears have in store tonight. But, I mean, this game, man, Yves Missi, we've heard a lot of good things. I've said a lot of good things about him. He's got to step up in the big games, man. He had 2 points this entire game. He missed that super important free throw to potentially, and likely in all reality, win the game against Houston. He also took us out of the game in overtime. He had a wide open dunk and the ball slipped out of his hands and went out of bounds. So Missi's got to play better. If Missi plays better, I think these Bears have a chance, but they got to find a way to hunker down coming down the stretch.
Just 2 bench points, too, in 45 minutes of basketball.
Yeah.
Not a lot of margin for error if that's the way that you go. Houston didn't have a ton of contributions from the bench. They still had 12, and that's, that's enough. If you average 12 bench points, that's enough to get you across the line. Baylor, like you said, plenty of opportunities to win these games, and against good teams, you're not going to get more than 1. So, Mike,
I think this is also going to be
a
different Baylor team whenever they get Langston Love back. That's their leading scorer right now for the team. So they can insert him back into the lineup, and they're going to have a 6th player. I think they'll be much better.
Yeah, he's one of 6 Baylor players who averages double figures. I don't think there's another team that can say that. But, Mike, we'll go over to Lawrence, Kansas. Kansas does they get a week off, and then they do beat Texas, but Kevin McCullough does not play, and Bill Self announces that he will not play tomorrow when they host BYU. A lot of Allen Fieldhouse magic going on in this game, but Kansas needs Kevin McCullough back for any sort of hope of a March run, don't you think?
Absolutely. They're going to get away with not having McCullough in the lineup against BYU. I think they'll still be able to get the job done. But when they close out the season, they got to go travel to Waco, and they got to travel to Houston to take on Baylor and the Houston Cougars. I don't think they will survive those 2 games undefeated without McCullough. In fact, I think they go 0-2 in those 2 games. So, yes, they absolutely need McCullough in order to have a chance to go to the big dance and get to the Final Four, win a championship. I think they do. I think this Kansas team still has some potential that we haven't seen this year. They have not played their best basketball, but they certainly need them. They played super well against Texas. They shot the daylights out of the ball, defended really well. Texas also looked pretty bad in this game. It was never really close. So, big win still for the Jayhawks without him.
Yeah, the whole situation with McCullough is a little odd. He's in there. He misses games. He's in there. Interesting situation there. Hope that he comes back because, he's definitely the best player on Kansas. Definitely a first-team all-conference selection at this point.
Yeah.
Mike, everywhere else in the conference, like you said earlier, Houston leading Iowa State by a game, and then they're a game above Kansas, who's a game above TCU, Baylor, and Texas Tech. So a lot of jockeying in the seeds. We'll be going now. We've got 2 bubble teams, we'll call it, in the Big 12. One has found new life, and the other, unfortunately, has had their at-large hopes kind of put into flames. So which one do you want to go to first?
We'll go with the bad first, and then we'll go to the good. So we'll talk about Cincinnati, Sean.
So Cincinnati on Wednesday, Mike, I think as we were recording or just after, took a home loss to Oklahoma State, one of the few bad losses that you can take in the Big 12 this year. And they followed that up with an 18-point loss on the road in Fort Worth against TCU. Cincinnati's first year in the conference. They had performing very well early on, a bunch of close calls. They could have won at at Baylor. They could have won at the Fog. They did win at BYU, but ultimately it seems like the Big 12 is wearing them down a little bit. They did win at UCF on February 17th, but on the road at Houston tomorrow night, it's just not enough games left for Cincinnati. They're 16-11 and 5-9 overall, but unfortunately for the Bearcats, it looks like year one of the Big 12 is going to end in an appearance in the NIT.
Yeah, I think they're going to get an NIT appearance. We're going to compare them briefly, Sean, to another team that's 16-11. The difference is that Cincinnati's falling apart before our eyes. We thought that they had a really good chance to make the tournament. They struggled against UCF last Saturday. Thought that was going to raise a red flag, and it certainly did. They did not perform against Oklahoma State. Seems like their defense has just fallen apart this year, Sean. This was a really good defensive team for most of this year. They picked up their signature win a few weeks ago at Texas Tech, a huge one in Lubbock, but they have not been able to follow that up. And Sean, when they've got Houston, Kansas State, Oklahoma, and West Virginia left, they could certainly win 3 out of those 4 games. But then I went 3 out of in Big 12 conference play. Is 8-10, get it? Yeah, maybe if you got 19 wins in the regular season, but I think their bubble is starting to burst and they're falling apart.
At this point, Mike, the bubble is shrinking, and they're probably worse than they're probably in the 4 to 8 to 10 team out range, and with bid stealers and other bubble teams that we'll talk about later playing well, sometimes the bubble expands. Sometimes teams play themselves out of the bubble. But it seems like that it's going to shrink this year, and Richmond's leading the Atlantic 10 now, and South Florida's leading the American. We'll talk about one of those teams later. But if you're in the last 4 in today, there's a chance that your spot can be erased by a bid stealer, and that is, I feel like last year and the year before we haven't really had that. Maybe 1 or 2. The last true bid steal that I remember is back in the COVID year when Georgetown and Oregon State won their tournaments when they weren't even close. But I think Cincinnati's going to run out of games. Unfortunately, they're real physical. They're big. They don't really shoot the 3. They've been able to shock some teams. They have 2 ranked road wins, but at the end of the day, you have to get enough wins in the column.
Yeah.
Go to Manhattan, Kansas, Mike, for the other team. Kansas State has some new life. After losing to Texas on the road, they did knock off BYU on Saturday pretty handily, and they have a big lead against West Virginia at home. Right now, we're going to assume that they take care of business and finish this one off. Kansas State will be 17-11 and 7-8 overall. A team that we thought was definitely out, might have a chance to put their name back in the ring come Selection Sunday.
Yeah, Sean, this is a team prior to this Brigham Young game that was coming off of 3 pretty crushing losses. A 6-point loss to Brigham Young, a 3-point loss to TCU, and a 6-point loss to Texas. All 3 of those games, they really had a good chance to win them, and they lost all of them. So coming into Saturday, I think they were kind of an afterthought. But, we're both fans of Jerome Tang on this show, Sean. And he said something on Thursday of last week in a press conference. He said somebody is going to come in the last 2 weeks of the season and snatch a bid from somebody that wasn't going to already have it. And why not us? They followed that up with a decisive against Brigham Young on Saturday, and now they're up by 23 points at the 16-minute timeout in the second half. So they're going to get the win here against West Virginia. That puts Kansas State at 7-8 in the conference, Sean. And if they can win 2 out of their last 3, not saying it's a lot easier said than done. They've got at Cincinnati, at Kansas, and then they host Iowa State. But if they can find a way to win 2 out of those last 3, Sean, at 9-9 in the Big 12 this year, I don't see how you can keep them out of the tournament.
The Big 12 is probably one of the only conferences that you can kind of play yourself back into things because all 3 of those wins are pretty impressive if you do pick them off. And then, things come to Big 12 tournament with the 14 teams. There's a potential for a 4th game that they won't be getting a double bye most likely, but you probably have first game of your Big 12 tournament is probably going to be against a tournament team, so there's another opportunity there. So definitely 3 wins the rest of the way, Mike. I think it would be really hard to leave them out. And then 2 might be enough if they happen to be, the right ones. So Kansas State definitely has some life back. Check real quick where their KenPom is at. They're 69th, not great, but they're 15th in defense. So you can always win a game with elite defense. I think that's going to be it for the Big 12, Mike. We are going to move on to the Big East. Actually, no, one more thing, Big 12. Sorry. Another team that is, impressive very early on has, I don't know if fallen off completely is the right word there, but that's the Oklahoma Sooners. They're 19-8, 7-7 overall. Still in a good place to make the tournament. And, Mike, they avoided disaster in the Bedlam rivalry. On the road, Javion McCollum hits a step-back 3 at the buzzer to win by 2 in overtime. How about this one for the Sooners?
Yeah, if Javion McCollum doesn't make that shot, Oklahoma is on the bubble. Absolutely they are. But he gets that step away 3-point shot to defeat Oklahoma State. And that's a completely different game plan for them. They've been getting beat up the last couple of games. They got crushed by Baylor, and then they lost pretty handily at home to Kansas. So they really needed this one. They found a way to get the win, and now they've got 2 weeks left in the regular season. They win a couple games, they're going to be dancing, and they're going to have a good enough seed to win a couple games.
Yeah, they were very impressive early on. It's unfortunate for them that as they kind of started to lose games in the Big 12, some of their wins didn't age too well, like Arkansas, for example. But throw the bracketology up there real quick. I do have them as a 7 seed, so they are probably still, a 3-game losing streak away from being out of the field. But good for Porter Moser. We didn't do much there last year, and I don't think we really expected him to do much there this year. But by all signs, they're going to be in the tournament this year. So, Mike, that is actually it for the Big 12. We'll go over to the Big East now, and another team that could have been picked for your team of the week. It's the St. John's Red Storm. They get the job done against Creighton. They win by 14 at the Garden. They pretty much lead by double digits for the large part of the game. I think Creighton got it to 5, but the Red Storm, called out by their coach, he since apologized, but they get a road win against Georgetown, and they get the big win that they've been searching for against Creighton.
Yeah, the reason they're not my team of the week is because how poorly they played against Georgetown. They gave up 85 points to them at the beginning of the week and almost lost that game. But they responded so well on Sunday afternoon, playing against the Creighton Jays in the Garden. Patino wearing his all-white suit. I think it looks kind of disgusting, but hey, that's your thing. That's your thing. St. John's dominated this game. I think part of it was – and we talked about last week, we thought Creighton was going to have a little hangover from that big win against UConn earlier in the week. And it sure seemed like that because this game, briefly got to a tie ball game in the second part of the first half. And this game was never really close in the second half. I think the closest it got was maybe 7 or 6 points. But hats off to St. John's. They're now 8-9 in the conference. Sean, are they in now?
I don't think so. Not yet. They're in position to be in position, as the saying goes. They needed a big win. They got it. They still do have a road game against Butler on Wednesday. Boy, is that important with where Butler is at. But, Mike, after that, they have DePaul and Georgetown. So, at the very least, you'd like to say they get 2 out of 3 and are 18-13 going into the Big East tournament, which is, by the way, in their building. So, they get the big win. Now you just need victories. I think if they beat Butler, who is also out of the field at this point, I think they're going to be in when it comes time for the Big East tournament if they win these next 3 ball games. And they're not going to play a terrible team in that first round because they have gotten themselves up to the 7th. Actually, no, they might play another DePaul Georgetown in the 7-10 game, and there's another opportunity to get another game over 500. So, St. John's has the big win. I don't really think they need to play another. Well, they probably won't play another team that's in the tournament until the quarterfinals of the Big East tournament if they get there. So opportunity to stack some victories and go into a Creighton or Marquette or Seton Hall with a 5-game winning streak. So things are looking up for the Johnnies. Also, we're probably dead if they dropped this game, but they got the job done by death by mid-range. It's a dangerous game. Dennis Jenkins did it. You could do it against the drop. You could do it against Kalkbrenner. You can do it against Dede at Purdue. Might not be the best way to carry yourself over the course of the year, but when it works, Creighton did not have an answer for Dennis Jenkins. He had 27 points, and it seemed like, Mike, he had 1 3 and 2 free throws. So he had 11 field goals from 2-point range, and having not known exactly, I think at least 7 or 8 of those are from the mid-range. So interesting, and don't think that was really... That's not really shocking to anybody who's watched Creighton this year, but potentially a way that you can get some open looks against the Blue Jays.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of this game, Sean, for Creighton was just a little bit of a hangover from one of their biggest wins in honestly, program history against UConn last week. So it's going to be back to the drawing board for Creighton. They're now 12th in the country, but they're going to have a difficult last 3 games in the regular season. They got to play Seton Hall here on Wednesday during the week before they host the 5th-ranked Marquette Golden Eagles, and then finish the season next Saturday at Villanova in Philadelphia. So 3 tough games coming down the stretch, Sean. I don't know how you feel if you're Creighton, but 3 good chances to get quality wins.
It is the total opposite of St. John's, Mike. The Red Storm can fatten up on the teams at the bottom heading into the Big East tournament, and Creighton might take a couple of shots until they get to go back to MSG. But they did get a week off before that last game against Villanova, but you're playing 3 teams that are 2 teams that are ahead of you in the standings, and then one of them that is fighting for their lives in Villanova. And the Wildcats definitely on the outside looking in at this point. They play 4 games the rest of the way. They could certainly play themselves back into the field, but the Big East, Seton Hall has probably separated themselves from the bubble at this point. They're probably the 5th or 6th last team in. And then you have Providence, which is in my last 4 in. And, I took a look at a bunch of other ones, and they all have them there too. So the Friars are really, really looking at things tightly. St. John's, Butler, and Villanova heading to the NIT at this point. But Big East, Mike, the Big East tournament's going to be good. It kind of always is, but this one you're going to have some desperate teams playing for a chance to keep playing.
And how impressive, Sean, would I say Seton Hall has been. I don't think anybody, Sean, in November or December, even late December, thought that 2 weeks before the end of the regular season we'd be talking about Seton Hall grabbing a 3 seed in the Big East tournament. But that's what they have right now. And we thought that, they were kind of on the downswing, and then they pick up 3 straight wins. 18-point win against Xavier, a nice win against St. John's on the road, and then they beat Butler by double digits at home this past Saturday. So impressive stuff from the Pirates. I think they got a really good shot against Creighton, even though it's on the road this week, and then they got a couple of games at home to finish the year against Villanova and DePaul. I like their chances in those.
Yeah, Mike, the 4 games left, Creighton, 3 overtimes at home. They could certainly win that one. UConn on the road, a team they already beat. Might not beat them there. But then you get a Villanova and DePaul at home. You'd like to think that Seton Hall could get at least 2 of those 4 games and get to 13-7 in the Big East, which they kind of needed after their bad non-conference. And
horrible non-conference.
Losing to some teams that haven't really turned out well, like USC and Iowa, and they Rutgers, and they lose to Baylor. They kind of lost all their games against power conference opponents, other than Missouri, who is the worst team in the SEC by far. So, things are looking good for the Hall. Things are looking good for the 3 teams that are ranked in the Big East. But other than that, this time of year as a bubble team is really, really stressful until Selection Sunday. But for the teams of the Big East, just going to have to just wait and a couple more games before things get really interesting. Mike, we're going to go to the SEC, which probably had one of the most fun college basketball games that I've ever watched. And that was a game where if you had just looked at the score, you might think it's an NBA game. Kentucky 117, Alabama 95. Quite the week for the Wildcats. Win on the road in the jungle in Auburn, lose on the road at LSU, and then you smack Alabama at Rupp. How about this week for Kentucky?
Yeah, I mean, it keeps showing us we don't know which Kentucky we're going to see. This Kentucky team somehow lost to Louisiana State at the start of the week and still moved up in the polls. And that's because they had such a convincing win against Alabama, scoring 117 points. Sean, you don't see too many conference opponents scoring 117 points. The issue for Kentucky in this game is they gave up 95. I think they gave up 56 in the second half. So 53. But still, this is a team that's giving up a lot of points right now, and you just don't know which Kentucky you're going to get. Are you going to get the guys that beat down Auburn on the road in Alabama a couple weekends ago? Or are you going to get the team that lost to LSU or Gonzaga? We just don't know who we're going to get this year, Sean. But there is one thing that Kentucky has proven, and that's that they can score the basketball. They are really good at scoring the basketball. They might be the most efficient offense in the country. The issue is, come tournament time, when is that game going to happen when they can't shoot? Where they're going to have an off night, and what's going to happen? Maybe it doesn't happen in the tournament, and maybe they can run the table to the Final Four. But something tells me, Sean, that these guys aren't able to be consistent enough to get to the Elite Eight Final Four.
Yeah, the LSU loss, I think, was extremely unlucky. They won on a broken play where the guy who was supposed to shoot it lost the ball and kind of just threw it up at the rim, and then
But they were so close.
Somebody happened to tip it in. Yeah, that is it. I think they deserve to win the game, but when you don't put teams away like that, you can lose. They did lose. I think they've been doing some things better defensively. I actually think they did not have a bad defensive game against Alabama. Alabama is, the top-ranked offense. I actually think they did a couple things better in this game than, go back to the Gonzaga game or some of the home loss to Tennessee or something like that. But Alabama in the second half decided to make this thing a track meet, and Kentucky was kind of like, oh, okay, we're making shots too. Justin Edwards goes 10 for 10. Reeves has 24. Dillingham 16. Ivisic 18. I think Kentucky 4 or 5 seed range. I think I have them at 4 seed right now. Let me check real quick. All right, yeah, I do. I don't think that a mid-major team can hang with them if they happen to get a 5 seed. Like a couple of those 12 seeds, like Indiana State, McNeese State, those teams are well-oiled offensive machines, but I think their offense might make them upset-proof, but once they get a team that can guard, I think you got to watch out. They have defended better, and you might not see it in the box score, but Bradshaw's playing less and less minutes. Onyenso has taken the starting 5, and Ivisic has done some okay things against some of the smaller 5s, especially when they went to Nelson as the small ball 5 at Alabama. But something to look out for sure for Kentucky. Up next for them is a road game against Mississippi State tomorrow, Mike. The Bulldogs are the first 9 seed that I have. Probably don't need to win it. It's a real good opportunity, though, for them to stamp their spot in the tournament, and another opportunity for Kentucky to build on what was a pretty good atmosphere there on Saturday at Rupp. But this one on Tuesday, for me at least, is going to show a lot about whether this thing can be consistent or until it's a matter of time until they get picked off.
This is a pesky Mississippi State team, a Mississippi State team that knocked off Tennessee in early January, and they also knocked off Auburn. I remember talking to an Auburn fan that day, and he thought, oh, it's a gimme game. We'll get a nice bounce back after their loss to Alabama. Absolutely not. This is a really good Mississippi State program, and they need to be on upset watch here, especially with Mississippi State winning 5 straight games. They're looking good. They're playing good basketball right now. So certainly not a gimme game for Kentucky. And you're right. I think we're going to learn a lot about this Wildcat team.
Yeah, the Mississippi State's best player, Tolu Smith, missed the entire first half of the year. He did return against Bethune-Cookman on December 31st. They won that game, but after that, Mike, in the 14 SEC games since then, they are 8-6, which is pretty impressive for the teams that they've played. They played Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, Florida, Auburn, Ole Miss, Alabama,
Yeah.
and they were able to knock off a couple of those teams, and now they're rolling. They are actually favorites tomorrow, according to ESPN here.
Go figure.
By 2.5 points. So
Wow.
they are this is as good as a defense as they're going to see here. Oops. Let's see. Yeah, 11th in the country in defensive efficiency. So if they can't slow Kentucky down, not sure who can.
Yeah.
Another SEC little tidbit that we can take a moment here, Mike, is South Carolina. They win on the road against Ole Miss. Looks like Chris Beard's guys are headed in the wrong direction, definitely on the outside looking in at this point. But the Gamecocks bounce back after getting humbled by Auburn, losing at home to LSU, but they bounce back and pick up a road win against Ole Miss. Much needed.
Yeah, they needed this. They needed this one. They got a full week off to prepare for this game, and it clearly showed. They got a 13-point win at Oxford, Mississippi, against their rivals, the Ole Miss Running Rebels. This was another one, Sean. This game was never really close. South Carolina had a 14-point lead at halftime, and that thing just kept going. South Carolina needed this game to settle down and get back into it after they excelled all the way up to 11th in the polls. And if you're Ole Miss, look, nobody expected Ole Miss to be any good this year. And I know people are kind of trying to bag on this Ole Miss team. They're 0-6 against top 25 opponents this year, so they just really haven't found their edge against quality teams. But I think this is just a start for Chris Beard's Running Rebels, and we'll see. Who knows? Maybe this team can become really good in the next couple of years. From watching Chris Beard in the Big 12 a lot, I think that this Rebel program is going to be winners in no time. But this year, just not their year.
Yeah, the results are finally catching up with the numbers. Despite them being kind of undefeated for, I think, the second longest.
Second longest, yeah.
They're still like 70th in Ken Pom, but it's catching up. Unfortunately for them, they're still 19-8. They play Alabama. They still could play themselves into the field. They play 3 teams that are not in the tournament as of now after they play Alabama, so not ruling out a 4-game win streak there. But this was really important for South Carolina. I think Lamont Paris said it's like we just kind of had a reset with the guys, and we asked, we would have taken 21-5 at this point at the beginning of the year. They bounce back, they get the job done, they're 10-4, and they will be going to the NCAA tournament. They have a road game against Texas A&M on Wednesday. The Aggies need that one really bad. Then they host Florida, host Tennessee, and go on the road to Mississippi State. Mike, a tough finish to the year for South Carolina.
No kidding.
Yeah, I'm not ruling out that they lose all 4 of those games.
No,
they probably can, but they probably can and still be in. But tough end of the year for the Gamecocks. Yikes.
Yeah, and I think we still don't really know what kind of South Carolina team we have, and that's because of a 40-point loss to Auburn and an LSU loss. And I do want to give LSU a lot of credit for being competitive just 2 years after having 0 scholarship players on their team going into the regular season. But, I mean, we still don't know which South Carolina team is out there, and they certainly have the ability to lose their last 4 games. Especially, I think you watch out for that Texas A&M game. I think that is a huge give-up game there.
Yeah, the Gamecocks did beat Kentucky by 17. They did win against Tennessee on the road. So it's not like they can't beat these big teams, but they were killed by Alabama. And like you said, they did lose to Auburn by 40. So something's got to even out here. I think maybe 2 more wins the rest of the way, and they probably increase where the position where they're at right now before the SEC tournament. And, the SEC tournament all of a sudden, Mike, is looking pretty impressive too. You have the really good teams pushing for a 1 seed. You have the teams in and around the bubble. And then, the Georgias and the Arkansas, playing on the first day are probably the best 11 and 12 seeds that you're going to see in any conference tournament. So, um,
Yeah,
not the
and
teams that
I
we
would say that
expected to be at the top of the SEC, but certainly some high quality ones.
I think you can certainly still look at for some of these teams that are not really going to get in right now as the tournament stands. But Texas A&M, they're 6-8 in the conference, 15-12 overall. I think you look out for them, Sean, going in their last few games and then into the tournament. Yeah, they got blown out by Tennessee, and they have struggled in their last 4 games. I think they have lost all of them, but they've got 4 winnable games right now coming down the stretch. They've got South Carolina, Georgia, Mississippi State, and Ole Miss. And if they can find a way to win all 4 of those games, Sean, that's another team that could play themselves into the tournament. So they're struggling right now, but we'll see if they can turn it around here with 4 games to go.
Yeah, they
certainly is an interesting conference.
Yeah, they are pretty close. They are my second team out. Going back to the ESPN events, they did beat Iowa State, which that win is aging really well. They beat Florida.
Huge.
They beat Tennessee.
Yeah.
They've beaten some of the good teams in this conference at this point. Mike, they just need victories. It probably doesn't matter who they come against. They got an opportunity against a tournament team in South Carolina, road game against Georgia, home game against Mississippi State, road game against Ole Miss. Those are the teams that are in and around you. Got to win those ball games, and I think they could. So next up, Mike, is the American Conference. A couple of interesting headlines from this one. We've got the South Florida Bulls leading this one. They were picked 13th out of 14 teams, and they have, they knocked off SMU on Sunday, and they have clinched at least a share of the title, and they have gotten a number next to their name, 21-5. USF is been really impressive in Coach Abdur Rahim's first year, and they are leading this conference. Still might not get an at-large, but there's a chance they could go to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, this team has won 13 straight games. They beat Florida Atlantic on Florida Atlantic's floor. They beat Memphis on Memphis's floor. Sean, I'll be honest, I don't know how these guys aren't in right now. It's solidly in the tournament. I mean, who knows what could happen in the last 3 games for them, but they're going to play a good Charlotte team on Saturday. Then they got to take on Tulane and Tulsa. I like their chances to beat Tulane and Tulsa. That Charlotte game is the only one that concerns me. And shoot, Sean, if they finish this season 23-6, going, what would that be, 16-2 in the conference? I mean, how do you not let these guys in with some of the quality wins that they have? So kudos to the Bulls on just buckling down and playing so well to get into the position they're in. But I think they're a couple wins away, Sean, from being a lock. And that's despite an insufferable out-of-conference where they lost to Maine, Hofstra, and Central Michigan. Those are 3 awful losses. I wouldn't be surprised if Maine was a quad 4 loss. Hofstra might be a quad 4 loss too, especially when they lost by 19 points at Hofstra. So what a turnaround for the Bulls.
Yeah, I think, Mike, ultimately, those losses are going to keep them out. They're just barely in the top 100 in the analytics, and they do have 2 quad 4 losses, as you said. So
yeah.
It's just there's been no precedence for a team getting in to the field with that sort of record. They also lost a road game against UMass, and it's just unfortunate for them because if they had won, those were some of the easier games on their non-conference schedule. Like they beat Florida State on a neutral, they beat Loyola Chicago, but they lost to teams that, Central Michigan 268 at home. That cost you. Unfortunately, you don't have to play FAU again. And the only time you'd have to play them is in the conference tournament, and FAU's going to the dance no matter what. So if that is the championship game, Mike, and one team is playing for their opportunity to go to the dance and the other is just, they've got another game already. I'm picking the Bulls in that game if it happens again.
I think, Sean, it's going to come down to just committee value the metrics more or when those losses were. So South Florida's those 4 bad losses that we first 6 games of the year. Since the 7th game of the year, they've lost one game. Since December 3rd, they've lost one game. And I think the committee is going to value that more than the metrics. As much as the metrics mean something, I think that they're going to mean a little bit less when those losses come in early mid-November.
Yes, and after all, Mike, they could just win the conference tournament and be an automatic qualifier, which I think they're my pick to win this conference tournament.
Hottest team.
How
could they not be?
Memphis has fallen off. Maybe they start trying again for the tournament, but FAU sitting there at the 8th seed in the East region again. FAU has looked uninterested at times this year, including in their loss at the FedEx Forum against Memphis. Unfortunate for Memphis is that they have played themselves out of a chance for an at-large. FAU loses their 7th game of the year. Only 1 or 2 bad losses, but David Jones puts the team on his back for 25. Naquan Tomlin has 21. And Memphis went from being an awesome team, top 10, Penny Hardaway Coach of the Year, and now they lost a bunch of games
next year.
A bunch of games, and now, Mike, the question is will he be fired? I don't think so, but at least for him, they get this victory over FAU. You think any chance Memphis could make a run in the American and steal a bid?
I think so, and the one really important thing for Memphis is that they're 4-0 against AP top 25 teams. That speaks volumes to their program. Now, coming down the stretch, they've got 3 games that, 2 of them you think that they're going to get. UAB, albeit UAB, a very good team, probably an NIT team. I think they're going to get that one, and then they got to also play East Carolina this week. I think they're going to get that one. But it's going to have an exciting final game of the regular season for Memphis when they travel down to Boca Raton to take on Florida Atlantic. I think both teams are going to be panicking a lot more than they should going into that game. Game means so much more. We thought that these guys might be playing for a regular season championship. They're not. They're playing for their seasons in this game. So this will be a really interesting one. I think Florida Atlantic's probably, if I had to get that game right now, I think they're going to get their revenge. But that's going to be a really, really interesting game, and that game has tournament and season complications for both these teams.
Yeah, Memphis probably won't be in if they do happen to lose in the tournament, but still better to win that game. If not, in FAU, like I said, they might not have a lot on the line in that game. If they win their next 2 games before that game, they're not going to need it. They're going to be prepping for the American Conference tournament, which FAU just needs to get to the tournament and turn up like they did last year when they came a mid-range jumper away from going to the national title game. But Mike, that is it for the American at this point. And the American, the Atlantic 10, and the Missouri Valley are 3 tournaments to watch if you are a fan of a bubble team, because all 3 of them could have bid stealers. We have Richmond leading the Atlantic 10 now, so that's why they get the automatic bid. And then we have Dayton also in the field no matter what as a 5 seed. Bubble teams, go Flyers, go. You want Dayton to win and take that bid away from Richmond. They won't get an at-large. Same can unfortunately be said about USF, most likely. So bubble fans gonna have to root for the Owls, and then also you probably want to root for Indiana State too, because Drake is right there, and if Drake happens to win that tournament, maybe the Sycamores get let in. So definitely things to watch out for if you're the fan of a bubble team. And like I said earlier, I don't think we've really had a true bid steal like that in quite some time. The A10 was a 1-bid league last year no matter what, and Missouri Valley did have 2 a couple of years ago when did Drake make the first 4 or something like that? I'll have to check.
I think the A10 had a couple. Richmond was a bid stealer a couple of years ago, and they won their conference championship game. And then they ended up beating Iowa in the first round of the tournament.
But yeah, so that Just going to have to watch out for that. Mike, ideally, we're going to get another episode out this week, so we're just going to do a couple of games worth of picks. We talked about it earlier. We're at 45 minutes already. We'll try and wrap it up real soon. First game, we'll go to you first. Kentucky at Mississippi State tomorrow night. Who you got?
I'm going to take the Dogs. Give me Mississippi State, get the upset win, and give us more question marks about what this Kentucky team really is.
Yeah, it would be better for Mississippi State to win this. Kentucky is, they're a protected seed now. They don't need it, and I think they will end up, I think Mississippi State ends up getting it. Next day, also in the SEC, Mike, number 11, Auburn on the road at Tennessee. Big-time game here on ESPN. Auburn bounced back from their loss to Kentucky with a big win on the road against Georgia. I'm going to say Auburn goes in there and gets a W. What about you?
Wow. I'm going to go with the Rocky Top on this one. Tennessee has been at home this year. They're coming off of a 35-point victory against the Aggies of Texas A&M, so I think Tennessee's going to get the job done again here.
And the last game, Mike, also, I will go to the Big East for the last game. Seton Hall on the road at Creighton. Game 1 went to 3 overtimes. Seton Hall above Creighton in the standings. Can the Pirates get the job done on the road here?
I'm going to go with the upset pick here, Sean. I'm going to go with Seton Hall. I think this team definitely is going to be playing with some fire going into this game because of their triple overtime loss. I know Seton Hall fans were pretty bitter with the officiating in that game. And I think Creighton, they're still trying to figure themselves out after that win over UConn. I'm going to go with the Pirates.
Yeah, I happen to agree. Unfortunately for, it's not.
Oh, no.
I happen to agree. I had Seton Hall. I have Seton Hall, too. I think they were very unlucky to lose that first game against Creighton. Yeah. Maybe the Blue Jays refocus after they really kind of lost. They were never going to win that St. John's game. But I like Seton Hall in this one, too. I think it'll be really close either way. Maybe Creighton squeaks it out. Maybe they don't. Now, Mike, ideally we'll get to another episode before the weekend. Obviously, way too many games to pick now, so I think that's where we'll leave it for today. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of Sports Daily College Basketball. Like, subscribe, check out the Instagram if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time.